NVIDIA has had a track record of releasing some pretty dreadful cards, with examples such as the GeForce 210 all the way up to the GT 1030. But today, we're going to take a look back at what they were doing in the early 2000s. This is the GeForce 4 MX420, a graphics card released in Q1 of 2002 for an MSRP of $99, and was one of the worst entry-level cards released by NVIDIA at the time. With specs of 64MB of SDR VRAM and running on NVIDIA's NV17 architecture with a core clock of 250MHz and being on the AGP4X bus interface, well, it wasn't exactly a screamer, which resulted in this card upon release being praised for being a cheap display adapter with a nice looking S-video out for older TVs, and it was clear that it wasn't exactly marketed for a gaming audience. Interestingly, at the release of the GeForce 4 MX line, many gaming enthusiasts criticised NVIDIA for making them a part of the GeForce 4 line, considering that the MX line ran worse than the preceding GeForce 3 line of cards, due to missing vertex and pixel shaders, meaning that the MX cards fell as a weird in-between of the GeForce 2 and GeForce 3 line. The nearest competitor that the MX420 had from the red guys was the ATI Radeon 7000, but the MX420 actually beat the Radeon in many areas, including a greater clock speed and double the VRAM, not to mention the 7000 series only had support for DirectX 7, versus the MX420 having support for DX8, which resulted in the MX420 actually being a better buy, due to the Radeon costing $30 more than the GeForce equivalent. With all the technical specs out of the way, it's finally time to put this to the test. As a point of comparison, I'm going to compare the MX420 to the FX5200, which was the lowest end card of the GeForce 5 series that succeeded the GeForce 4, so we can see what improvements were made within a year. We're going to be using my AGP test bench, otherwise known as the 478 Retro build, featuring a Pentium 4 running at 2.8GHz, 2GB of DDR RAM, and an 80GB hard drive. Starting off in Doom 95, we saw no difference between the MX420 and FX5200, which is, well, expected considering the game is from 1995 and these cards were both released in the early 2000s. But yes, they ran perfectly, running at 480p high settings. Next up we've got GTA 3 running at high settings, and you get to hear my live reaction to this game. Something tells me this game isn't running properly. Oh. So yes, when we compare the MX420 to our experience with the FX5200, it's clear that the poor MX420 did not enjoy GTA 3. Now, while on paper the experience in Half-Life 1 was the same across the board, we did actually experience some input lag, which I'll throw up on screen now, and it really did render the game unplayable, but it still ran smoothly, so I don't know whether this is a fault of the card or just an incompatibility with the rest of the system. In Half-Life 2 running at 1680 by 1050 lowest settings, we pretty much got the same results across the board within the margin of error. So yeah, Half-Life 2 ran about the same across the board. In Quake 3 Arena, while we did see a 20 FPS boost on the FX5200, the game was still playable either way, and both cards could run the game fine, so it's up to you what experience you choose. In Quake 4, it was obvious the MX420 did not enjoy this game. While the FX5200 wasn't very good itself, we saw an almost 20 FPS difference between the two cards, rating the MX420 a bad and FX5200 was poor performance. CS 1.6 was certainly playable at 1680 by 1050 high settings, but the average FPS was cut down by half on the MX420 versus the FX5200, meaning the FX5200 came off on top, but the MX420 was still playable. And finally, to finish off the benchmarks, we've got SimCity 3000. Running at 1024 by 768 highest settings, we achieved an average FPS of 106, with the FX5200 achieving 129. So while both cards were definitely playable, there was a 20 FPS difference between the two, meaning the FX5200 came out on top. So what's my final conclusion? Well, it's obvious that in most games the FX5200's performance succeeded the MX420, but I think the real thing to take away from that is that these changes between the two cards were made within a year. The difference between the lowest end GeForce card, released in 2002, and the lowest end GeForce 5, released in 2003, shows us that instead of relying on old GeForce 3 technology, NVIDIA went out of their way to actually impress consumers on the lower end, offering far superior performance and other graphical features, but for the GeForce 4 MX line, well, that remains another insignificant piece of NVIDIA history. If you enjoyed this look back at GeForce 4 MX, then don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with future Techwen content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.